Dr. Elena Vasquez was reviewing quarterly supply manifests when the proximity alarms began shrieking throughout Terra Station. As director of colonial operations, she'd heard those alarms exactly 3 times in her 15-year career, twice for asteroid impacts and once for a Centauri diplomatic vessel that had forgotten to transmit proper identification codes. "Director, you need to see this," came the urgent voice of Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the sensor station. "We have an unscheduled arrival at the outer marker, but the ship's configuration doesn't match anything in our databases." Elena made her way to the command center, where the massive holographic displays showed a vessel that made her breath catch in her throat. The ship was unmistakably human in design. The angular lines and modular construction were characteristic of Earth's colonial fleet, but it was wrong somehow. Components that should have been separate were seamlessly integrated. Surfaces that should have been matte gray gleamed with an opalescent shimmer, and the entire vessel seemed to pulse with energy patterns that made the sensors give contradictory readings. IFF transponder shows. Hayes paused, checking his readings twice. "Ma'am, it's identifying itself as the Prosperity." Elena felt the command center fall silent around her. The Prosperity had been Earth's most ambitious colonial venture, a massive ship carrying 50,000 colonists to establish humanity's first settlement in the Kepler system. It had launched with great fanfare 23 years ago and promptly vanished without a trace 6 months into its journey. "That's impossible," whispered Dr. Chen, the station's chief physicist. "The Prosperity was destroyed. We detected the debris field." "Apparently not," Elena interrupted, watching as the ship approached with movements that seemed to ignore basic principles of momentum and inertia. "Hail them, standard colonial protocols." The response came immediately, and Elena found herself looking at Captain Marcus Webb, older than he should have been, but unmistakably the man who had commanded the Prosperity. Behind him, she could see a bridge that bore only passing resemblance to standard human ship designs. "Terra Station, this is Captain Webb of the colonial vessel Prosperity. Requesting permission to dock, and, well, there's quite a bit we need to discuss." "Captain Webb," Elena replied carefully, "you've been missing for over 2 decades. Our records show the Prosperity was lost with all hands in 2157. Webb's expression grew complicated. "Ma'am, from our perspective, it's been 23 years and 4 months since we left Earth orbit. We've been trying to get home for, well, it's been a very long journey." "Where have you been?" Webb paused, exchanging glances with someone off-screen. "That's going to require a longer conversation. Permission to dock?" Elena granted permission, though she ordered security teams to standing positions throughout the docking bay. As the Prosperity approached the station, the sensor readings became increasingly bizarre. The ship's mass readings fluctuated wildly. Its energy signature showed patterns that shouldn't have been possible with human technology, and several times the sensors briefly lost track of the vessel entirely, despite clear visual confirmation of its presence. "Director," reported Chief Engineer Martinez from the docking bay. "The ship's docking procedure is unusual. They're not using thrusters for positioning adjustments." "What are they using?" "I honestly don't know. The ship is moving with perfect precision, but our sensors can't detect any propulsion systems active. It's like they're just willing themselves into position." Elena watched through the bay's viewing ports as the Prosperity settled into the docking cradle with impossible gentleness for something of its size. The ship was definitely the missing colony vessel, but modifications had been made that turned it into something that barely resembled human technology. Captain Webb arrived at the station accompanied by a small delegation that included Dr. Sarah Kim, the Prosperity's chief scientist, and Commander James Rodriguez, their engineering officer. All 3 showed signs of having aged normally during their absence, but there was something different about them, a confidence in their movements and an intensity in their eyes that suggested experiences far beyond anything a standard colonial mission would provide. "Director Vasquez," Webb began as they settled into the main conference room, "I know this situation raises a lot of questions. Let me start with the basic facts. The Prosperity was not destroyed 23 years ago. We were displaced." "Displaced how?" Dr. Kim answered that question. "We encountered a spatial anomaly 3 days out from the inner system jump point. Our navigation systems couldn't classify it, but it appeared to be a stable wormhole leading to an unknown region of space. "And you investigated it?" "We didn't have much choice," Commander Rodriguez said grimly. "The anomaly's gravitational effects pulled us in before we could alter course. We found ourselves in a solar system that existed in what we eventually learned was a parallel dimensional space." Elena exchanged glances with her own science staff. "Parallel dimensions are theoretical constructs, Commander." "Not anymore," Dr. Kim replied, activating a portable display device that projected holographic star charts unlike anything Elena had ever seen. "The dimension we found ourselves in operated under physical laws that were similar to ours, but with crucial differences. Energy could be manipulated directly through conscious intent, matter could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, and the barriers between dimensions were permeable under the right conditions." "You're talking about magic," Dr. Chen said skeptically. "We're talking about physics," Dr. Kim corrected. "Just physics that operate according to principles we hadn't discovered yet." "The dimension we found ourselves in had been inhabited by a species that had learned to manipulate these physical laws directly." Captain Webb continued the explanation. "The beings we encountered, we called them the architects, had been working for millions of years to understand the fundamental structure of reality. They helped us modify our ship and taught us techniques for manipulating quantum fields through directed consciousness." Elena felt like she was listening to an elaborate fiction, but the evidence was sitting right outside her station. "These modifications, that's why your ship's sensor readings are impossible?" "The Prosperity now operates partially in normal space and partially in quantum superposition," Commander Rodriguez explained. "We can exist in multiple dimensional coordinates simultaneously, which allows for faster-than-light travel without the limitations of traditional wormhole generators." "Show me," Elena said simply. Dr. Kim smiled and activated her display device again. This time, instead of showing star charts, the holographic projector began demonstrating the principles they'd learned. Energy flowed through the air in visible streams, small objects began floating without any apparent support, and the device itself briefly flickered in and out of existence. "Conscious manipulation of quantum fields," Dr. Kim explained as Elena stared in astonishment. "The architects taught us that consciousness isn't separate from physical reality. It's one of the fundamental forces that shapes how energy and matter interact." "This violates everything we know about physics," Dr. Chen whispered. "No," Captain Webb corrected. "It expands everything we know about physics. The laws we've discovered still apply. They're just incomplete. Reality has layers we never suspected, and those layers can be accessed through proper understanding and technique." Elena was beginning to understand the implications of what she was hearing. "You've brought back technology that gives humanity capabilities we never imagined possible." "Not just technology," Dr. Kim said. "Knowledge, understanding, the ability to manipulate reality itself through directed consciousness and quantum field manipulation." "Why come back now?" Elena asked. "After 23 years, why return to Earth space?" Captain Webb's expression grew serious. "Because the architects warned us about something. The techniques they taught us revealed that our home dimension, normal space-time, is under threat from entities that exist in the spaces between dimensions." "What kind of threat?" "Beings that consume dimensional stability itself," Commander Rodriguez explained. "They feed on the quantum foundations that hold space-time together, leaving behind regions of collapsed reality that expand outward like cancer." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "And these entities are heading toward our space?" "They're already here," Dr. Kim said quietly. "The first dimensional collapses were detected in the Outer Rim territories 6 months ago. The architect's long-range sensors show that the entities will reach core human space within 2 years. Unless we stop them," Webb added. "Which is why we came back. The techniques we learned, the ability to manipulate quantum fields and exist in multiple dimensional states. Those are the only known methods for fighting entities that attack the foundation of reality itself." Elena stared at the 3 officers, realizing that what had seemed like humanity's greatest loss, the Prosperity and its 50,000 colonists, had actually been its greatest opportunity. The ship that had vanished while pursuing humanity's expansion into space had returned, carrying knowledge that could save their entire civilization. "The colonists?" she asked suddenly. "What happened to the 50,000 people aboard your ship?" "They're still alive," Captain Webb said with a smile. still aboard the Prosperity. The ship's modifications include dimensional expansion techniques. Our internal space is now approximately 100 times larger than our external dimensions. The colonists have been building a civilization that exists partially in normal space and partially in quantum superposition. They've learned the techniques too? All of them, Dr. Kim confirmed. Men, women, children, everyone aboard the ship can now manipulate quantum fields to some degree. We're not just bringing back technology, Director. We're bringing back 50,000 humans who have evolved beyond the limitations of conventional physics. Elena realized that everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe had just become obsolete. The missing colony ship hadn't just returned with advanced technology, it had returned with an entirely new understanding of what humans could become. "I need to contact Earth Command immediately," she said finally. "This changes everything." "Yes," Captain Webb agreed. "It does. But, Director, there's one more thing you should know." "What?" "The entities threatening our dimension, they're not unknown to us. The architects have been fighting them for millions of years, and they've never encountered another species that could learn the quantum manipulation techniques as quickly as humans did." Webb paused, letting the implications sink in. Humanity doesn't just have the tools to fight these entities. We may be the first species with the natural ability to master dimensional physics at the level necessary to drive them back permanently. Elena stared at the holographic displays still showing impossible manipulations of energy and matter, beginning to understand that the Prosperity's return marked the beginning of a new chapter in human development. The missing colony ship had brought back more than advanced technology. It had brought back proof that humanity's potential exceeded every limitation they had accepted as permanent. The ship that had vanished while carrying humanity's hopes for expansion had returned, carrying the power to transcend the basic laws of physics themselves. And if the entities threatening reality thought they could consume dimensional stability unchallenged, they were about to discover that humans had spent 23 years learning to fight on levels of existence they had never encountered before. The missing colony ship had returned, and with it came the realization that humanity's greatest journey was just beginning. Within 6 hours of Elena's emergency transmission to Earth Command, every available ship in the Sol system was racing toward Terra Station. The implications of the Prosperity's return had sent shockwaves through humanity's government, military, and scientific communities. A ship carrying technology that violated known physics, 50,000 evolved humans, and warnings about reality-consuming entities was the kind of crisis that required immediate attention from the highest levels of leadership. Admiral Chen Harrison arrived aboard the flagship Enterprise, accompanied by Dr. Maria Santos, Earth's leading theoretical physicist, and Director James Mitchell from the Department of Colonial Affairs. As their shuttle approached Terra Station, they could see the Prosperity in its docking bay, and even from a distance, the ship's impossible characteristics were evident. "The energy readings are off the charts," Dr. Santos muttered, studying her scanner displays. "That ship is generating power signatures that shouldn't be possible with human technology, but the patterns are definitely artificial rather than alien." Captain Webb's preliminary report mentions 50,000 colonists who have learned to manipulate quantum fields, Admiral Harrison said grimly. "I need to understand what we're dealing with before we commit to any course of action." The first meeting between Earth's leadership and the Prosperity's officers took place in Terra Station's largest conference room, which had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate the expected crowd. Elena watched as Captain Webb, Dr. Kim, and Commander Rodriguez faced a panel of officials who would determine humanity's response to their revelations. "Captain Webb," Admiral Harrison began, "your report describes capabilities that sound more like science fiction than actual technology. Before we proceed, I need a demonstration of these alleged quantum manipulation abilities." Dr. Kim nodded and stepped forward. "With your permission, Admiral, I'll provide a basic demonstration of dimensional manipulation techniques." She closed her eyes for a moment, and suddenly the air in the conference room began to shimmer. Objects on the table started floating without any visible support, while patterns of light danced through the space above their heads. But the most dramatic effect was when Dr. Kim herself began to flicker in and out of existence, appearing solid one moment and translucent the next. "I'm currently existing in 3 different dimensional coordinates simultaneously," she explained while continuing to phase between states. "In normal space-time, in quantum superposition, and in what the architects call transition space, the boundary region between dimensions." Dr. Santos stared in fascination as her instruments registered energy patterns that shouldn't have been possible. The quantum field fluctuations are unlike anything in our theoretical models. You're somehow maintaining coherent consciousness while existing in multiple dimensional states. Consciousness is the key, Dr. Kim replied, returning to full solidity. The architects taught us that directed consciousness can influence quantum field behavior directly. What we think of as the observer effect in quantum mechanics is actually a fundamental interaction between consciousness and reality itself. And all 50,000 colonists can do this? Asked Director Mitchell. To varying degrees, Commander Rodriguez answered. Some have developed incredible precision in quantum manipulation, while others are more skilled at dimensional perception or energy channeling. The children who were born during our 23 years in transition space show the most natural ability. They can manipulate reality as easily as we use our hands. Admiral Harrison leaned forward intently. These entities you mentioned, the ones that consume dimensional stability, how immediate is this threat? Captain Webb activated a holographic display showing star charts that made Elena's stomach drop. Red zones indicating dimensional collapse were spreading through the outer rim territories like a disease, with each affected region expanding outward in perfect spheres. The collapses started in the Tau Ceti system 6 months ago, Webb explained. Since then, we've detected similar events in 12 other star systems. The pattern suggests these entities move systematically, consuming the quantum foundations of reality and leaving behind zones where space-time itself breaks down. What happens to any inhabited worlds in those zones? Dr. Santos asked, though her expression suggested she dreaded the answer. They cease to exist, Dr. Kim said simply. Not destroyed. Literally erased from reality. The dimensional collapse unravels the quantum structures that allow matter and energy to maintain coherent existence. The conference room fell silent. As the implications sank in, humanity was facing an enemy that didn't just destroy civilizations, it erased them from the fundamental structure of the universe itself. How do we fight something like that? Admiral Harrison asked. By operating on the same dimensional level they do, Captain Webb replied. The techniques we learned allow us to stabilize quantum fields and reinforce dimensional boundaries, but it requires humans who can manipulate reality directly through consciousness. You're talking about training our entire population in these techniques? We're talking about evolution, Dr. Kim corrected. The architects believe that consciousness-based quantum manipulation represents the next stage in human development. The colonists aboard the Prosperity have already made that transition. Elena had been listening to the exchange with growing amazement, but now she spoke up. Captain, you mentioned that your internal space is larger than your external dimensions. Could we see these evolved colonists? Webb smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. With your permission, Admiral, I'd like to invite you aboard the Prosperity. But I should warn you, the experience can be disorienting for people who haven't learned dimensional perception techniques. An hour later, Elena found herself following a small group of Earth officials through the Prosperity's airlock. The moment she stepped inside the ship, she knew something fundamental had changed. The corridors were impossibly vast, stretching into distances that couldn't exist within the ship's external dimensions. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with gentle energy, and the air carried a quality that made her feel more alert and aware than she'd ever experienced. Welcome to expanded space, Dr. Kim said, as she guided them through corridors that defied geometry. The ship's internal dimensions exist partially in normal space-time and partially in quantum superposition. We've essentially created a pocket universe that can contain far more space than its external boundaries suggest. They passed through areas that looked like traditional ship sections, but also through spaces that resembled parks, residential districts, and what appeared to be research laboratories, where impossible things were happening as casually as normal work. Elena watched a group of children playing a game that involved manipulating floating balls of light with their minds, while nearby adults conducted conversations while existing in multiple visual states simultaneously. This is remarkable, Dr. Santos breathed, watching as one of the colonists demonstrated perfect control over gravity in a localized area. You've created a civilization that operates according to principles we're only beginning to understand. More than that, Webb replied. We've created a civilization that can teach those principles to others. Every person you see here started as a normal human with standard Earth education. The quantum manipulation abilities can be learned by anyone willing to expand their understanding of consciousness and reality. They were introduced to Dr. Patricia Wong, who had been an agricultural specialist before the Prosperity's displacement, and was now the ship's leading expert on dimensional physics. She demonstrated techniques that allowed her to create stable portals between different areas of the ship, manipulate matter at the molecular level through directed thought, and even slow the passage of time in localized regions. The learning process typically takes 6 to 8 months for adults, Dr. Wong explained while casually creating a flower from base matter. Children learn much faster, usually within weeks. The key is abandoning the assumption that consciousness and physical reality are separate phenomena. Admiral Harrison watched these demonstrations with the expression of someone trying to process information that challenged every assumption about human potential. Dr. Wong, in your opinion, how many humans would need to learn these techniques to effectively counter the dimensional entities? Based on the architect's guidance, we estimate that 10% of the population with basic quantum manipulation skills would be sufficient for defensive purposes, she replied. For offensive operations to drive the entities back to their origin dimension, we'd need perhaps 1% with advanced capabilities. Offensive operations? Captain Webb answered that question. The entities aren't invincible. They're just operating on dimensional levels that conventional technology can't reach. But humans with consciousness-based quantum manipulation can engage them directly in transition space and force them back through dimensional barriers. Elena found herself wondering how humanity would react to learning that their missing colonists had returned with abilities that seemed magical but were actually the next stage of human evolution. The social, political, and philosophical implications were staggering. As they concluded their tour of the Prosperity, Admiral Harrison gathered the Earth officials for a private discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a decision that will determine the future course of human civilization. Do we commit to learning these techniques and evolving beyond our current limitations, or do we maintain conventional approaches and hope the threat remains confined to the outer rim? With respect, Admiral, Elena interjected, I don't think we have a choice. The dimensional collapses are expanding. If we don't learn to fight on the same level as these entities, they'll eventually reach Earth itself. Dr. Santos nodded agreement. From a scientific perspective, what we've seen today represents breakthroughs that will advance human understanding by centuries. The colonists have learned to manipulate forces we didn't even know existed. Then we proceed with full integration, Admiral Harrison decided. Captain Webb, I'm authorizing you to begin training programs immediately. We need to start preparing as many humans as possible for consciousness-based quantum manipulation. There's one more thing you should know, Webb said, as they prepared to return to Terra Station. The architects provided us with long-range sensors that can detect dimensional instabilities across vast distances. We've been monitoring the situation while traveling back to Earth space. He activated a holographic display showing a three-dimensional map of local space with pulsing red indicators marking dimensional collapse zones. The entities aren't just randomly consuming reality. They're moving in a specific pattern that suggests they're searching for something. And based on their trajectory, they're heading directly towards Sol's system. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the implications. They're looking for Earth, or more specifically, Dr. Kim added grimly, they're looking for humans. The architects believe these entities have encountered species with consciousness-based abilities before, and they view such civilizations as particularly dangerous threats to their expansion. Admiral Harrison stared at the display showing the inexorable approach of forces that could erase Earth from existence itself. How long do we have? 18 months, maybe 2 years before they reach the inner system, Webb replied. But Admiral, there's something else. The rate of dimensional collapse has been accelerating since we started our journey home. The entities may have detected our return and realized that humans have learned capabilities they consider threatening. The missing colony ship had indeed returned carrying technology that broke physics, and with it, the knowledge that humanity was about to face the ultimate test of their newly discovered potential. The entities that consumed reality itself were coming for Earth, and humanity's only hope lay in learning to fight on dimensions of existence they were just beginning to understand. As they returned to Terra Station to begin the most important training program in human history, Elena realized that the Prosperity's 23-year journey had been more than a displacement. It had been preparation for a war that would determine whether human consciousness could evolve fast enough to save their species from entities that viewed reality itself as food. The missing colony ship had returned just in time to teach humanity how to transcend the laws of physics, because conventional physics would never be enough to survive what was coming. Within 3 weeks of Admiral Harrison's authorization, humanity began the most radical transformation in its history. The Prosperity had been moved to Earth orbit, where it served as both training facility and proof that human consciousness could transcend conventional limitations. Dr. Kim and her team worked around the clock to develop teaching methods that could compress 23 years of learning into months of intensive training. The first volunteer trainees were drawn from Earth's scientific and military communities, individuals with the intellectual flexibility to accept that everything they understood about reality was incomplete. Elena found herself among the initial group, having requested transfer from Terra Station to participate in what everyone was calling the Consciousness Project. The most difficult part isn't learning the techniques, Dr. Wong explained to a classroom of 30 volunteers, each seated in meditation positions while monitoring equipment track their brain activity. The most difficult part is accepting that your thoughts can directly influence physical reality. Most adults have spent decades learning that consciousness and matter are separate, and unlearning that assumption requires fundamental shifts in thinking. Elena closed her eyes and tried to follow the visualization exercises Dr. Wong had taught them. She was supposed to imagine her consciousness extending beyond her physical body, reaching out to interact with the quantum fields that surrounded every particle of matter. For the first week, nothing had happened except headaches and frustration. But on the 8th day, something clicked. Elena suddenly felt a sensation like stepping outside during a storm, awareness of vast energies flowing around her, invisible currents that she could sense, and, with careful concentration, touch. When she opened her eyes, a stylus on the desk in front of her was floating 6 inches in the air, held there by her directed attention. "Excellent," Dr. Wong said with satisfaction. "You've achieved your first quantum field interaction. How does it feel?" "Like the universe is much more responsive than I ever imagined," Elena replied, gently lowering the stylus back to the desk. "I can sense the energy patterns that hold matter together, and they react to focused intention." Around the classroom, similar breakthroughs were occurring daily. Military officers learned to manipulate gravitational fields around small objects. Physicists discovered they could perceive quantum probability clouds directly through consciousness rather than mathematical equations. Engineers found they could modify matter at the molecular level by visualizing changes and willing them into existence. But the children were the real revelation. Schools across Earth had begun incorporating consciousness training into their curricula, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. 8-year-olds casually demonstrated abilities that took adults months to develop. They could see through dimensional barriers, communicate telepathically across vast distances, and manipulate reality with the effortless confidence that came from never learning it was supposed to be impossible. The younger generation is adapting to consciousness-based abilities as naturally as they once learned to use computers, reported Dr. Martinez, Earth's newly appointed Director of Human Development. Children born in the past 5 years show instinctive quantum manipulation skills that suggest human consciousness is evolving rapidly toward these capabilities. Meanwhile, monitoring stations throughout human space tracked the continued expansion of dimensional collapse zones. The entities were moving faster than initially projected, consuming entire star systems with methodical efficiency. Long-range sensors detected massive structures in the void where systems had once existed, geometric patterns that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. "The entities appear to be building something," Captain Webb reported during a briefing with Earth Command. "Each dimensional collapse creates raw material that they're incorporating into structures of increasing complexity. The architects warned us about this behavior. It suggests they're preparing for large-scale expansion into new dimensional territories." Admiral Harrison studied the holographic displays showing the entities' construction activities. "How much time do we have before they reach the inner system?" "Original estimates were 18 months, Dr. Kim replied grimly. "But their acceleration suggests 12 months, possibly less. And Admiral, there's something else we've discovered about their capabilities." She activated new displays showing sensor readings that made Elena's stomach clench with fear. "The entities can detect consciousness-based quantum manipulation from incredible distances. Every time we train new humans in these abilities, we're essentially broadcasting our location and capabilities to them. They know we're here, they know we're learning to fight on their level, and they're adjusting their approach accordingly. The implications were terrifying. Humanity's efforts to defend themselves were simultaneously announcing their location to enemies that viewed evolved consciousness as a threat to be eliminated. Then we accelerate the training programs, Admiral Harrison decided. If they know where we are anyway, our only option is to prepare as many humans as possible before they arrive. The crash training program that followed pushed human society to its breaking point. Millions of volunteers underwent intensive consciousness development, while those who showed natural aptitude were immediately enrolled in advanced combat applications. The Prosperity's colonists served as instructors, teaching techniques for reinforcing dimensional boundaries, stabilizing quantum fields under attack, and engaging entities that existed partially outside normal reality. Elena found herself assigned to an elite unit training for direct combat with the dimensional entities. The techniques they learned went far beyond simple object manipulation. They practiced existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, creating stable portals for rapid deployment, and generating quantum disruption fields that could destabilize matter at the subatomic level. Remember, instructed Commander Rodriguez during combat training exercises, these entities don't have physical forms in the conventional sense. They're patterns of organized energy that consume the quantum foundations of reality. You can't shoot them with conventional weapons, but you can disrupt their coherence through directed consciousness applied at specific dimensional frequencies. The training was exhausting in ways Elena had never experienced. Manipulating quantum fields through consciousness required mental discipline that pushed human cognitive abilities to their limits. Many trainees suffered from what Dr. Kim called dimensional fatigue, a condition where excessive quantum manipulation temporarily disrupted their ability to maintain normal consciousness. But for those who mastered the techniques, the capabilities were extraordinary. Elite combat teams could teleport instantly across interstellar distances, exist in quantum superposition to avoid attacks that occurred in normal spacetime, and strike targets through dimensional barriers that conventional physics considered impenetrable. As humanity's consciousness-based abilities expanded, so did their understanding of the threat they faced. Deep space reconnaissance missions, using quantum-enhanced sensors, revealed the true scope of the entity's expansion. They weren't just consuming individual star systems, they were systematically dismantling the quantum foundations that allowed matter and energy to exist in stable forms. They're not invaders in the traditional sense, Dr. Santos explained during a joint briefing with military and scientific leadership. They're more like a cosmic cleanup crew, erasing what they consider flawed or inefficient forms of reality, and replacing them with structures optimized for their purposes. And what purposes are those? Asked Admiral Harrison. Based on the construction patterns we've observed, they appear to be building a form of reality that exists entirely under their conscious control, Captain Webb replied. A universe where every quantum field, every particle interaction, every energy flow operates according to their directed intentions. Elena realized they were facing entities that wanted to transform the entire universe into an extension of their own consciousness. A reality where nothing could exist without their permission, and everything operated according to their design principles. The good news, Dr. Kim added, is that human consciousness appears to be inherently incompatible with their control systems. The techniques we've learned create quantum patterns they can't assimilate or override. That's why they view evolved human consciousness as such a dangerous threat. And the bad news? The bad news is that they're not just coming to Earth to eliminate us. Based on intercepted communications the architects have translated, they're planning to use human consciousness as a template for understanding how to control consciousness-based quantum manipulation in other species. The entities weren't just planning to destroy humanity. They wanted to study human consciousness in order to develop countermeasures against other evolved civilizations they might encounter in their expansion across reality itself. How close are they now? Admiral Harrison asked quietly. Captain Webb activated the latest sensor readings, showing red zones of dimensional collapse that had reached the outer edge of Sol System. 6 months, Admiral. They're consuming the Kuiper Belt objects systematically, building a staging area in the outer system before their final approach to Earth. Elena stared at the displays, showing her home system being systematically erased by entities that existed beyond conventional understanding. Humanity had learned to manipulate reality through consciousness, but they were about to face the ultimate test of those abilities against enemies that had been perfecting reality manipulation for eons. The missing colony ship had returned with the knowledge humanity needed to transcend physics, but now they would discover whether 23 years of evolution could match millions of years of dimensional conquest. The war for the future of human consciousness was about to begin, and the battlefield would be reality itself. The first direct encounter came when a scouting force of dimensional entities reached Neptune's orbit. Elena was aboard the Prosperity, now serving as the flagship for humanity's consciousness-enhanced fleet, when the sensors detected reality beginning to unravel in the outer system. Dimensional collapse initiated at coordinates 47.3 by 15.8, reported Lieutenant Park from the Quantum Detection Station. The entities are consuming Neptune's quantum foundations. Elena watched through the ship's enhanced viewing systems as the gas giant simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not exploded, erased from reality so completely that space-time itself closed over the gap where it had been. The casual erasure of an entire world demonstrated the scale of what humanity was facing. All combat teams to dimensional stations, Captain Webb announced throughout the ship. We're going to test human capabilities against reality eaters. Elena made her way to the Consciousness Combat Center, where 30 of Earth's most advanced trainees prepared for engagement. The center bore no resemblance to traditional military command rooms. Instead of weapons systems and tactical displays, it contained meditation platforms surrounded by quantum field generators that amplified consciousness-based abilities. Remember, Dr. Kim addressed the combat team through the ship's communication systems. These entities exist partially outside normal space-time. Conventional attacks pass through them harmlessly, but directed consciousness applied at specific dimensional frequencies can disrupt their coherence patterns. Elena closed her eyes and extended her awareness beyond her physical body, feeling for the quantum currents that flowed through space around the Prosperity. The sensation had become familiar during months of intensive training, but now she could sense something wrong, areas where the normal flow of quantum fields was being systematically disrupted. "Contact," announced Dr. Wong from her dimensional perception station. "I'm detecting entity presence approximately 10,000 kilometers off our port side. They're beautiful in a terrifying way." Elena shifted her consciousness to full-dimensional perception and immediately understood what Dr. Wong meant. The entities appeared as geometric patterns of incredible complexity, crystalline structures that existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. They pulsed with organized energy that created harmony wherever they went. But it was a harmony that required the complete elimination of anything that didn't conform to their design principles. "They're trying to assimilate our quantum signatures," reported Commander Torres from the Intrepid, one of 12 Earth vessels that had been modified with consciousness enhancement systems. "Our conventional shielding is useless against their approach. All ships, shift to quantum superposition," Captain Webb ordered. "Let's see how they handle targets that exist in multiple dimensional states." Elena felt the Prosperity phase into quantum superposition, existing simultaneously in normal space-time and in the transition dimensions the colonists had learned to navigate. From the entity's perspective, the human fleet would appear to flicker in and out of existence, making them impossible to target with conventional reality manipulation techniques. The entity's response was immediate and sophisticated. Instead of trying to lock onto the human ships directly, they began altering the dimensional foundations of the space around them, creating regions where quantum superposition became unstable. "They're forcing us back into normal space-time," Elena reported as she felt the ship's dimensional flexibility beginning to constrain. "Their reality manipulation is more advanced than our defensive techniques." "Then we go on the offensive," Captain Webb decided. "All combat teams, prepare for consciousness strike." Elena synchronized her awareness with the other 29 members of her combat team, feeling their individual consciousness merge into a collective focused intention. Together, they reached across dimensional barriers to strike directly at the entity's coherence patterns. The attack hit the lead entity like a hammer blow applied to crystal. Elena felt the creature's surprise as its carefully organized energy patterns suddenly faced disruption from directions that shouldn't have existed. Human consciousness operated according to principles the entities had never encountered: chaotic, creative, and fundamentally unpredictable. "Direct hit," reported Dr. Kim as the sensors showed the entity's geometric perfection beginning to fragment. "Its coherence is destabilizing." But the entities adapted with frightening speed. The damaged creature's energy patterns reorganized themselves, incorporating the human attack patterns into their own structure. When the second wave of human consciousness strikes arrived, the entities were ready with countermeasures. "They're learning from our attacks," Elena warned as she felt her directed consciousness being analyzed and cataloged by intellects, vast and alien. Each strike teaches them more about human thought patterns. The battle that followed transcended anything in human experience. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions maneuvered through space that was being systematically rewritten by entities that viewed reality as a construction project. Human consciousness struck at patterns of organized energy that adapted and evolved with each exchange. Elena found herself engaged in direct mental combat with an entity that existed as pure organized thought. It tried to understand her consciousness by cataloging her memories, emotions, and thought processes, while she fought to maintain the chaotic creativity that made human minds inherently unassimilable. "All teams, implement random consciousness protocols," Captain Webb ordered as he realized the entities were gaining tactical advantage through their analytical approach. "Don't let them predict your thought patterns." Elena shifted her consciousness into the meditative chaos techniques the colonists had developed, maintaining focused intention while allowing her thoughts to follow completely unpredictable patterns. The entity trying to analyze her mental processes suddenly found itself dealing with a mind that operated according to principles that defied systematic understanding. The tide of battle began to turn as human unpredictability met entity optimization. The creatures could adapt to attacks that followed logical patterns, but human consciousness included elements of pure creativity, emotional inspiration, and intuitive leaps that couldn't be reduced to analyzable algorithms. "They're withdrawing," reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the Enterprise. "The entities are pulling back toward the outer system." Elena maintained her consciousness link with the retreating entities long enough to understand their confusion. They had encountered a form of consciousness that refused to operate according to rational principles, making it impossible to predict, control, or assimilate. "This was just a probe," Dr. Kim warned, as the human fleet regrouped near Mars' orbit. "They were testing our capabilities and gathering information about human consciousness. The real attack will incorporate everything they learned from this engagement." Captain Webb gathered the fleet commanders for immediate tactical planning. "How long before they return in force?" "Based on their withdrawal patterns, I'd estimate 72 hours, Dr. Wong replied. "They're pulling back to process the intelligence they gathered and develop new approaches to human consciousness." Elena realized that humanity's greatest strength, the chaotic creativity of human minds, was also their greatest vulnerability. The entities would now spend 3 days analyzing human thought patterns and developing systematic countermeasures to human unpredictability. "We need to accelerate human evolution even further," she said during the strategy session. "If they can adapt to our current consciousness patterns, we need to develop new forms of awareness they've never encountered." Dr. Kim nodded agreement. "The colonists aboard the Prosperity have been working on advanced techniques that push consciousness beyond individual awareness into collective intelligence networks. If we can link human minds across interstellar distances." "You're talking about merging human consciousness into a single entity?" Admiral Harrison asked via quantum communication from Earth. "Not merging," Captain Webb corrected. "Networking. Individual human minds maintaining their creativity and unpredictability while sharing processing power and awareness across vast distances. The entities understand individual consciousness and collective consciousness, but they've never encountered networked consciousness that maintains individual chaos within collective coordination." The next 72 hours became the most intensive period of human development in history. Every person on Earth with consciousness-based abilities participated in experimental networking protocols, learning to link their awareness with others while maintaining the chaotic creativity that made human minds unassimilable. Elena found herself serving as a node in a network that included millions of human minds across Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, and the various ships of the enhanced fleet. She could feel the thoughts and experiences of countless other humans while remaining fundamentally herself, a paradox of individual identity within collective awareness. "Network integration at maximum efficiency," reported Dr. Martinez from Earth. "We now have approximately 40 million humans linked in conscious coordination while maintaining individual creative chaos. The computational power is beyond anything the entities have likely encountered." When the entities returned in force, they faced a humanity that had evolved beyond their analytical capabilities. Individual human ships operated with the coordinated precision of a single mind, while maintaining the unpredictable creativity of 40 million individual consciousnesses. Human attacks came from directions that existed only in networked imagination, striking at vulnerabilities that individual minds could never have perceived. Elena felt her consciousness expand across the entire Sol system as the networked humans engaged entities that had been consuming reality for eons. She was simultaneously herself, part of a vast collective intelligence and a unique creative force that no amount of analysis could predict or control. The entity's systematic reality manipulation met human consciousness that operated according to principles that transcended individual or collective intelligence. Networked chaos proved impossible to analyze, adapt to, or counter. "They're not just withdrawing," Dr. Kim reported as the entities began pulling back not just from Earth, but from the entire local region of space. "They're abandoning this dimensional territory entirely." Elena maintained her network connection long enough to sense the entity's final communication before they departed, a mixture of frustrated recognition and something that might have been respect. They had encountered a form of consciousness that represented evolution beyond their understanding, and they acknowledged that human awareness had transcended the limitations they had assumed were universal. As the network gradually dissolved back into individual consciousnesses, Elena found herself forever changed by the experience of being simultaneously individual and collective. Humanity had not just survived the encounter with reality-consuming entities, they had evolved into something those entities couldn't comprehend or control. "What happens now?" Admiral Harrison asked during the post-battle debriefing. Captain Webb smiled as he looked around at the humans who had just transcended the limitations of individual consciousness while maintaining their essential humanity. "Now we explore what we've become. The entities forced us to evolve beyond conventional consciousness, but that evolution opens possibilities we're only beginning to understand." Elena realized that the missing colony ship's return had been more than a rescue mission. It had been the catalyst for humanity's transformation into a form of consciousness that could network across vast distances while maintaining individual creativity, exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, and manipulate reality through directed intention. The Prosperity had returned carrying technology that broke physics, but more importantly, it had returned carrying proof that human consciousness could evolve beyond any limitation, even those imposed by entities that consumed reality itself. Humanity had learned to fight beings that existed beyond conventional physics by becoming something beyond conventional existence. The missing colony ship had brought them home to a species that was no longer entirely human, but was something far more extraordinary than anyone had imagined possible. Elena watched the entities retreat into deep space, their perfect geometric forms flickering out of existence as they abandoned this region of reality entirely. The missing colony ship Prosperity had returned carrying impossible technology, but more importantly, it had taught humanity to evolve beyond the limits of individual consciousness. As the networked awareness of 40 million human minds settled into a new form of existence, Elena realized the truth. The ship hadn't been lost for 23 years. It had been preparing humanity for this moment. The Prosperity was home, humanity had transcended physics itself, and the universe would never be the same. The end.